the revolution starting inside. An instrumental part of Agora worldwide. Agora worldwide, Agora worldwide. Counter economics, Agorist strip. Black market click, move a quick flip. Can't regulate this, Agorist strip. Black market click, move a quick flip. Can't regulate this, Agorist.
Agorist.
Agorist. Nexus, Agorist.
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 It's Brandon with the Agorist Nexus podcast. I've got an exciting guest on today, Matt Anarchist, the anarchist investor. So I've always wanted to kind of sit down and have a conversation with him. And I finally get to do that. Before we get into it, though, shout out to our sponsor, Presearch, decentralized search engine. Earn crypto as you search. Our link's down below if you want 50 pre. Great overall project. You can run nodes. You can easily advertise by staking. Just overall great project. Get away from big tech that sells your data and invades your privacy. So get away from that. Again, our link's down below. But yeah, we'll definitely get into this episode here. How you doing, Matt?
I'm fantastic. I want to say thank you. I've been reading Agorist Nexus for a while, and I know some of the contributors, and y'all do a fantastic job over there. So it's great.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, and I definitely see your videos and stuff in Crossing. So every once in a while, I actually get a chance to sit down and like have some coffee or something. So it's always good to like meet new anarchists and stuff like who have different perspectives. And but I think actually we actually have like very similar mind too. How did you get into like the anarchist philosophy and stuff?
Yeah, it's like a long road. I'll try and give you the to bust out an old school reference.
It always is, right?
Yeah, I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version. So I was raised in a very right-wing household. So Christian conservative. My father was a police officer for 27 years, and he was a Marine before that. It very neocon-y in terms of the kind of the political philosophy throughout the 80s and 90s, big Reagan people and Bush people. And so I was a little bit of a black sheep. I was given enough rope to kind of question things. So I was a good little church boy when I was younger, and I was supportive of everything that my family was supportive of when I was young. But as I started to get into, high school and college age, I was given the opportunity to kind of reach out. I was very math and science minded. I went to school for engineering. So engineering is just inherently, kind of like it piques that curiosity, and it gets you moving in that direction of trying to come to actual answers as opposed to, just kind of assumptions or supposition, right? So it happened 9/11 happened while I was a sophomore in college, and I can literally remember the day it happened. I was watching the preliminary, the first plane hit the first tower. I had to then go to class after that happened. I had a cell phone that I was actually getting text updates from news services while I was sitting in, I can remember sitting in fluid dynamics class. And my initial reaction, because of my background, was I was very angry, right? Like I think a lot of people immediately had, after the shock and kind of the pain piece of it, I think there was a lot of kind of like just natural, anger that came about. There was maybe about like 2-3 days in and I was born and raised in New Jersey. So growing up in the New York City, New Jersey area, there was like 2 or 3 days where everyone kind of had this like kumbaya moment. And then after that, like the war machine just ramped up like crazy. And I was actually on the pro, blow everyone up kind of side of things until one day where, and I still can't find this clip, but it sticks in my head to this day. There's a press conference where the retarded Bush was giving a press conference, and the reporter asked about like basically innocent victims, right? Like asked about the number of civilian casualties, and he laughed, like outwardly laughed, and then went, I don't know, like 4,500, 5,000, I don't know, right? Like as if it didn't even matter, like as if these were not people, they were just like, lint or something that was
Ah,
gotten rid of summarily. And in that moment, I had this like, oh shit kind of feeling. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but from that very moment, I started to kind of like the dam started to break, right? Um, Along comes Ron Paul talking about blowback, and it just clicked. I was like, it just makes so much sense, right? Like the guy is speaking not just something that sounds good, but just the chain of events link up, like most of the facts lead in that direction. Um, and it just sent me down this path. And I could tell you that like for a long time I would consider myself a libertarian because I still held on to those, those vestiges of, saluting the flag and, the sanctity of the Constitution, all this other stuff. Um, Come 2020, and all of the libertarianness that was still left in me was just completely shattered, right? Um, and I had to make I had to make some sense of the pieces that were left, because I literally saw everything that I understood wasn't perfect, but like I was one of those like, well, it's the best we have right now kind of thing, and let's try and work towards some incremental change. I saw all of that obliterated overnight. Like it was like a holy crap, it's worse than I could ever possibly imagine it was. And luckily enough, I found a couple of friends online on Twitter of all places in the toxic soup that is Twitter. And I found some friends that were actually living in New Jersey, and they were all kind of asking the same questions I was asking. We were reading some of the same books, Murray Rothbard and Anatomy of the State and No Treason and all this other stuff. And we came together, and I tell them this like every couple of months. Like we have a group chat that will probably continue on for a very long time into our senior years. And I tell them this all the time. I'm like, you guys probably saved my life because that was a very dark time for a lot of people, and for me especially because just my reality was blown apart. Um, and the logic that was involved there, the mutual kind of like uh picking back up of the pieces and the reforming what our world looked like was really freaking valuable, and it reformed a foundation that I had lost in 2020. And what's funny is like a lot of people have gone through that since 2020. They've gone through that kind of destruction, that kind of demolition of their world, and they're having to try and rebuild. And you're seeing a lot of people, flock to different areas to try and, fill that gap. And a lot of people are picking a lot of like very easily kind of like off the shelf. Like a lot of people went back to religion, right? Like that was a big thing. A lot of people doubled down on this kind of like constitutional save our republic kind of thing, right? Um, and it just led me in a path where I was like, you know what, this just makes sense. You see the threads of it throughout all of human history. The use of force and the centralization of power that corrupts and then essentially dominates people, essentially enslaves them. And in many cases, they're literally cheering on, right, their own slave masters. And so yeah, I mean, like I know I said I just Putined the interview, and I was like, I'm gonna give you the Reader's Digest version, and we're like 10 minutes later. But yeah, that was really the path. I mean, it was there were some bumps along the way, but I couldn't point to just one thing, right?
one thing, yeah.
It had to happen in that sequence.
Yeah, my story is pretty long too, so I completely understand that. Tell me how the anarchist investor got into the investor side of it. If you
Yeah.
could.
After I got out of engineering school, I had a couple of, different positions, and then I eventually soured on that, and I found myself into the finance world because, I wanted to make millions or whatever. live in New Jersey, you look across the river and you see New York City and Wall Street all the time, right? Like visit it. Um, and so I had that training, right? But I'm also going through this kind of psychological or philosophical path, right? This evolution. And uh the it becomes evident when you go through all of these different kind of steps to get to the point where I'm at kind of like ideologically as far as politics and agorism or anarchy, that you begin to understand where the system is used to enslave you, right? And pretty much the biggest component of it is the monetary system. It is the system of wealth. It is the system of, transactional money, or what they purport to be transactional money. And I saw it firsthand. And what's funny is like so many people within that industry, like the 99.99999% of it, they see the same things I saw, but they have such a vested interest in it that they essentially can't see it, right? So not to get too nerdy, but like I keep coming back to this. Like once it got brought back up to me within the last year or two, it makes so much sense. It's basically the allegory of the cave, right? Like it's the and if anyone who's listening or watching hasn't heard about it, it's essentially an allegory that's set up to help kind of like explain how people exist in this reality. And some people are stuck in the cave, literally chained, watching, projections of forms on a wall that they think is reality. There's people that are creating projections on the wall. And then there's the select few people that are actually able to either exit the cave on their own, or in most cases, they're literally dragged out of the cave and they have to make sense of what the real world actually looks like. Um, the people in the finance industry, as in most life, right? Like what makes a normie is that they see the world as those projections on the wall. And that is their entire world. They will fight to protect that vision of what is on the wall. Because if they don't, it literally shatters their reality. And they can't even begin to entertain the possibility that those shadows on the wall are not the truth. They're not what is actually the real world. And so I had the fortunate path to be able to kind of have this evolution at the same time that I was learning within the finance industry. And I've worked in retail banking. I've worked in financial management, personal financial advisory services, and then I've worked as an insurance broker and risk manager on the commercial side. And so I've seen a lot of different, aspects of this. And it really made sense to me that it's like if people are going to harness their own freedom and take it back after many of them having given it willfully, and but also in many cases having it stolen from them or defrauded from them, if they're going to take it back, it starts with their money. Like it really has to, because at the end of the day, what holds most people back from, you know, whatever word you want to put in there, revolution, regime change, political, you know, basically, refreshing the tree of liberty, right? Like, whatever you want to call that, right? What stops people from getting to the point of actually doing it before they have to, make war and kill other people and that kind of stuff is literally that fear of, how do I feed myself? How do I feed my family? How do I house us? What happens if we get sick, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's really the biggest component here of people being able to kind of reclaim their freedom. And so that's what really inspired me. I started in 2020, and if you look back, like the I also host a podcast called Ungovernable with my wife that has also evolved over time. And if you go back and look at the earliest episodes of that channel, the Ungovernable podcast used to be called Why Libertarian, right? Like before my libertarianness kind of got just hit with a nuclear bomb. And big L libertarian, right? So the earliest episodes are I mean, you can see my evolution happen over that period of time where I was asking questions about kind of like constitutionality, and I was asking questions about like, why is it that they don't understand what they're doing, right? Um, and now when you talk to me in the present day, it's like I'm a completely different person. Um, I needed something other than just yelling out into the void to be a constructive way to help people. And so that's that's me kind of leveraging my skill set that I've acquired in normie land to help people at least gain back a little bit of their freedom and a little bit of their liberty in their life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like you said, the financial part of it is pretty huge. It's a pretty huge power structure of, the system. So yeah, I think it's very important to liberate yourself and to definitely try to do that to get away from the slavers.
Yeah, and
Um,
the added component there, sorry to cut you off, but the added component there is if you continue to try and exist in their world without understanding the ramifications of what you're doing, they're making money off of your back. And so just like tax, you're also contributing to the people that you're essentially enabling people and giving them more ammunition to enslave you further by participating in that system the way that they want you to participate in.
yeah. So tell me about, as an anarchist and an investor, tell us like what some people can do, not only from like a libertarian perspective. I guess start with the more libertarian stuff first, and then kind of shoot into like the Agora side like as much as possible.
Sure. I think the probably the most normie adjacent take that I have is like I'm a big precious metals guy. I think gold and silver is real money. As we kind of have defined money over the last few thousand years. And I think it will continue to be real money. And I think everything else is just kind of a cheap replication or ripoff of it, or not money at all. A la, U.S. currency isn't really currency. It's more, indentured banknotes. And so that's really the most normie take I have is anyone who is not holding, and I'm a big advocate for physical custody. So, and that follows through a number of different asset classes. But physically holding gold and silver, I think, is probably step one, right? Um, Step two is understanding how that you can then leverage gold and silver is actually a means for transaction. Okay. And it's possible, right? And it's probably the lowest barrier to entry for most people who have lived their entire lives in the wide scale system that we have right now. Things like gold backs, things like using silver, transactionally with your friends and kind of like in small community basis. That is all very easily accessible and understandable for people. Um, the the other piece of this would be like, in terms of like the stock market and things like that. I I don't advocate people keep a lot of their money in stocks, but that being said, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. I'm not the person that you should listen to really if you're going to put a lot of money in stocks or any money in stocks really. The stocks I typically focus on are still very commodity based. They're more natural resource, or like, the one ETF that I purchase is based off of uranium mining because I think that's the future of energy production. Um, and there's just not another good alternative to be able to gain access to that type of investment. So that's also kind of normie adjacent. And it also, I believe, fits in with a very, at the very least, kind of like liberty-minded mindset of energy production being able to be domestic, readily available, et cetera, cheap, relatively clean for the environment. So that's kind of like one end of it. The other end of it is the more anarchist piece of it. I think that most people want to avoid taxes, but at the same time they don't know how to. Okay, in the United States specifically, the easiest way to avoid taxes is essentially using the system against itself. And so the easiest way to do that is real estate. The reason why the government is so turns an intentionally blind eye, or and in fact, in many cases, facilitates that system of real estate ownership and investment and how you can avoid taxation, is they're really bad at providing um, housing and uh, basically property development in general. It's because they're so slow. And in fact, most of the problems that we have in the property space is because government has involved itself and has created huge supply disruption. So you have areas like Detroit, which have very low property prices and a huge number of available properties, but just no one wants to live there because the government screwed it all up. And then you have other areas like northern New Jersey where the government is trying to screw it up. They haven't successfully done it just yet, but that day is coming. But because it's adjacent to New York City, it's a very desirable place, and there's still a supply shortage. And so you see these huge disparities within or between regions where certain regions have very high supply, low pricing, and then the polar opposites of that in other regions. The government specifically facilitates your ability as an investor, if you can figure it out, facilitates your ability to almost completely eliminate your tax burden. Okay. Now, granted, there's other kind of runoff things that happen in the real estate transactions and whatnot that do generate tax revenue. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the easiest way to do it and not necessarily run aground of like having to worry about the, IRS or federal agents show up at your door one day is real estate. And so I'm a huge believer in real estate, and I think more people should get involved in real estate. I know a lot of anarchists, especially if you're kind of like that on that anSocial or ANCOM end of the spectrum, want to avoid that because they don't believe that, they believe that it's an exertion of force to like hold someone's, place of residence over their head or whatever. I do think there's an ethical way to invest in real estate and come up with a voluntary and mutually beneficial relationship with the people that are, partaking in that real estate, and can benefit you both in terms of you being able to defer or remove your tax liability and not fund the machine, and at the same time also help out others who do need good quality lodging at a, I would call it a fair price, as opposed to some kind of artificially inflated pricing, right? So yeah, that's a big component of it. And then the last component of it, I would put crypto in. I would also put some other things that are very much kind of like quote unquote alternative investment types. I think crypto needs to be a portion of your portfolio. I think anarchists, libertarians, liberty-minded people, I think they over-index on crypto. I think crypto's heyday is going to be in 10 or 20 years. And I think a lot of people think that it's right now. And I just don't see it. I think the bubble has to pop first, because really at the heart of it, crypto is technology. And so that tech bubble I see to be very similar to, say, the dot-com bubble that happened at the turn of the century. But so crypto is a component of it. I'm actually a huge believer in bartering. I think bartering is a fantastic way to circumvent certain centralized power centers within the financial space. I think that flipping is a huge thing, right? Now, it does kind of, if you're, it may run aground of your ideological stance if you are against, say, like consumerism, but sometimes you have to use the system to benefit yourself, if as long as you're not, being predatory to others. Well, that consumeristic behavior means that there's just tons of shit sitting everywhere that people could use, and there's an income or a value that you can derive from being able to take where that stuff is sitting unused and link it up to people that need it and can use it and would benefit from getting that thing at a much lower cost than if they had to go buy it from, Jeff Bezos or Mark Cuban or one of the other kind of like fat cats that are out there that want you to buy a bunch of cheap shit all the time, right? And so it really runs the gamut. The most difficult thing I have on the anarchist investor side is it's freaking complicated, right? any one of these different kind of like baskets of investment, you have to educate yourself, right? You have to read. Sometimes you're going to make some mistakes, so you need some, life experience where that goes. Um, and I don't even have most of them down, right? So like the real estate thing, I'm beginning to build that portfolio out, and I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to catalog those mistakes so other people can learn from it. But really, at the end of the day, it's really understanding, where you're putting your money, what are you getting from it, right? Like I think the system is built to keep people asleep, right? It's like the they live scenario. And so most people think that all they need is Social Security and the 4 or 5% every month that they put into their 401k with their company match. And that's going to be their retirement. That's going to be all of their assets and things like that. And that's what's going to take care of them into their, golden years. Uh, I think they're going to be given a very rude awakening here within the next, I would say, 10 or 20 years, because I can't, I can't dictate when this is going to happen, but it's going to happen. It's an inevitability. And in fact, what's interesting is I was just thinking about it earlier today. The United States as an empire might go down in history as the most prolific and most rapid rise and fall of an empire in human history, right? Um, we're just south of 250 years right now, give or take, depending on where you draw the line. Um, and to rise to be the most powerful, dominant, and I would make the argument predatory empire that's ever existed, to then falling again because of all of the excess and the largesse and the corruption that's happening right now, will be unprecedented. It will never have happened that quickly. But the empire is at the very least going to take a really big haircut, if not completely fall. And so some of this investment advice is also that kind of like preparatory, learning that people have to do to position themselves and their future generations of their family for when that happens. And I think a lot of people have run aground of they think it's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month. And I mean, it could, but it's a very low probability. What's more than likely is it's going to happen over a period of, a couple hundred years. And so, the American Empire might be given a little bit more of a heyday. Maybe we get to 400 years. Who knows? But it can happen quickly. But I think a lot of people have overestimated, like the Bitcoin maxis think that the dollar is going to get scrapped within like the next couple of years. I really don't think that's the case. And so, unfortunately, it's guiding a lot of people to make some, I'd call it desperate, kind of investment moves with their savings and their portfolios. And unfortunately, they're going to get burnt too. And so that's one of the reasons why I've called for crypto. I think crypto bubble and crypto has to pop, because I think we really need to see what comes up. I mean, when you just have so many, like, just think about it. I talked about this with, I don't know if you saw the episode with Vinny Barbosa, but we talked about, some of the shit coins that are out there. And by some, I mean like literally the thousands, right, that are out there that are every single one of them has no use case. They're literally just a scam. Like someone in their basement figured out how to coin a new token, a new crypto, and then just like millions of dollars flood into it. And it's essentially nothing but a pump and dump scheme. That the crypto market is rampant with that. And so the only thing that clears that out is a crash, right? Like the only thing that clears out that bubble mentality and that mania is a crash. And so it's coming. I mean, the last week has not been great for Bitcoin and Ethereum, but I don't know if I'm ready to, call that crash just yet either. But yeah, it's complicated. It's wide sweeping. There's so much in there. And so, if I had to give one piece of advice to people, it's like, just do one thing, right? Like just try and figure out one thing, which is why I started with gold and silver, because I think it's the easiest entry point to kind of get you introduced into that space, and then, go from there. And then you could kind of pick it apart from that. So, I I know that was a very long-winded answer as far as the question that you gave me, but there's so much that's going on right now that I don't think any one person fully grasps the gravity of everything that's happening. But I think most people can feel it. There's a lot of bad that's about to hit. The question becomes, where and to what extent, right?
Yeah, when you talk about like a crypto crash or like, I I'm not exactly sure because like there's really only like a $2 trillion like if you go to coin market cap,
Hmm.
the overall market cap of every single crypto that's listed on coin market cap, there's only like a $2 trillion cap of crypto when like the gold and silver markets are much, much higher. I think um I don't know if you know the market cap of gold, but um, I think like gold or
It's huge.
silver, yeah, it's in the the tens of trillions or something. I think gold alone has like what a $10 trillion market cap or something crazy like that.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm just pulling it up right now. It's like oh Jesus, the most awful infographic ever. Sorry. All right. Uh Gold, give or take, and again, this is based off of some of this is relative to how they value it, but the gold crypto market cap right now is just over 16 million, or sorry, 16 trillion. Um the silver market cap is about like 1.7, 1.8 trillion. Bitcoin itself is at 1.125 trillion. I think that's a recent print on that. So yeah, I mean, gold is roughly, 15 to 16x what Bitcoin is right now.
yeah, yeah, and so I'm kind of in the like now in terms of like investment stuff. Like, of course, this is not nobody's saying that this is like anything that we're saying is investment advice for sure. But yeah, I do respect uh, your opinion for sure. But I think that it is kind of a little early on crypto, like in terms of some of these other projects. I think like maybe Bitcoin itself is a little um, overdue for some kind of awakening, if you will, like
Mhm.
in terms of like it's it's just limiting in my opinion, and they're trying to like fix it, but they're trying to fix it with like Lightning Network, right? And so um but they're going away from like Austrian economics. They're
Mhm.
moving away from like an Austrian economics perspective, and I definitely have been very vocal about that over the years of how the all these fallacies that they're going off of.
Well, so
But
what I find interesting about the crypto space is that I still think a lot of people have yet I don't think there's a I don't think that there's like an average or a consensus understanding of what the crypto space really is. Um, and so the question I would have for you is like, for you, if I had to ask you, like, what would you explain to someone, a normie, right? Like, what is crypto, right? Whether you want to talk about like the entire space or let's just talk, Bitcoin, right? Like, what is Bitcoin at the end of the day to you?
Bitcoin to me is the BTC version of Bitcoin to me is
Mhm.
a Um, it's dressed up as a Austrian economics solution to a very complicated monetary problem.
Mhm.
Um, but in essence, it's merely just clothing. It's just a nice suit at the end of the day.
Mhm.
When in reality, um, and again, this is just the BTC version. The reality of Bitcoin to me is that it's pretty much been co-opted. It's been taken over
Mhm.
by like whatever you want to call them, centralizers or people who have no idea what true economics is, or even why uh, why the a lot of the early people got into it in the first place was because they
Mhm.
knew Austrian economics.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin to me is nothing but like failed promise. Now, there's coins that, especially if you read the Bitcoin white paper, and if you read like the Bitcoin white paper and like Minger and Carl Minger and some of these other philosophers, you'll realize that the way that Bitcoin is going is definitely you know not one of like an Austrian economics place, but there are some cryptos that promise that do keep that hold that promise a lot better. Like the Bitcoin Cash version is more of like an Austrian, um, more of like what the Austrian school wants. Can I
Yeah.
say that there's like one crypto that hits every single Austrian perspective? I think we're still early in that sense.
Mhm.
Um, I think that I don't know. I still kind of think that we're somewhat early in terms of crypto, just
Mhm.
because I just don't see like everyone using it, right?
Yeah.
Like when you talk to your normal person, they may have heard it, but they don't use it at all. So it's kind of like to me, kind of still the early days of the internet where, yeah, a lot of people heard it, but they still don't have dial-up.
Yeah.
They still don't. They still you don't see this mass adoption yet. So I still kind of sense that we're early in that perspective. And then in terms of like a lot of other assets, um, I think that like the overall market cap is definitely like not mainstream yet. So I still
Yep.
kind of think that we might be early in that sense too. I really personally like silver a
Mhm.
lot because small market cap. The gold silver ratio has been very, very nice recently. But
Mhm.
I hopefully I touched on your question as much as possible. But
Yeah. Well, I think you're probably struggling with a lot of the same questions that I struggle with. And I think you have to understand that um, you and I are in the minority, the vast minority. And I'm not even talking about the vast minority of like all people. I'm talking about the vast minority of people who own crypto. Um, I think the overwhelming majority of money, at least within the last, say, 4 years, that's come into crypto, has all been speculative money. And by speculative money, I mean there's a lot of people that think it's their lotto ticket, right? Um, they have no clue what crypto is. They don't know what blockchain technology is. They might be able to tell you kind of like in general what it is, but ultimately at the end of the day, they have no way of connecting that with how valuable the blockchain is or how valuable each cryptocurrency should be, right? Like there's no price to earnings multiple for crypto. Okay. A lot of people have kind of taken a pot shot at trying to figure out what value, Bitcoin should be, because I think a lot of Bitcoin maxis get very zoned in on this idea of there's only 21 million Bitcoin. And then if Bitcoin takes over, all of the overtakes all of the fiat in the world, right? Or if it takes on 50% of the market share of how fiat is used and everything like that. Where that kind of breaks down is Bitcoin is trash to use as a transactional coin. It just is, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
the wait time, speed of the network, fees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Um,
and then if you
but
try to use layer two, then there's issues there, and it's
yeah,
it's not
not
very user friendly, and
not to
yeah,
mention the fact that you still run aground of all of the things that Bitcoin was supposed to fix, right? Like it was supposed to be anonymous. It was supposed to be, trustless in terms of like you didn't necessarily need a third party or an intermediary.
hmm
Most of it's become re-intermediated, I would call it, and centralized because of the exchanges and what the SEC and whatnot has done. In fact, I in the can I have an interview with Aaron Day, and he's declared DEFCON 1 because I always get that wrong. DEFCON 5, DEFCON 1. I forget which one's the worst. But he's
I believe
basically
DefCon one is the worst.
the worst. Yeah, he's basically declared DEFCON 1 in the crypto space because he believes that it's been completely hijacked by the very power centers that it was meant to pull control and power away from. And but see, even in that discussion is okay, again, what is it? Is it a transactional currency? Is it a privacy currency? Is it a, you know, that's why I tell people like I'm more a gold and silver guy than I think I ever will be a Bitcoin guy with, maybe some evolution happens in the Bitcoin space in the future, but I still think gold and silver has stood the test of time, and it does most of what Bitcoin was supposed to do in the beginning as far as that kind of like liberty aspect of things. But beyond that, for me, what any cryptocurrency is derived from the underlying blockchain, right? And so you have a bunch of different primary layer blockchains. You have Bitcoin, you have Ethereum, you have Solana and a bunch of others. And then you have these secondary blockchains, these secondary layer blockchains that have arisen, and they have their own cryptos. For me, at the end of the day, you're basically buying a technology. You're buying a technology company, because whether it's actually fostered or overseen by some group of people, or whether or not it's fully decentralized or whatnot, for me, the value of that coin has to do with the data that's stored on the blockchain and the quality of that data and the value of it, right? So if you have a blockchain where most of the data, like the vast majority of the data, is just people speculating on what the cryptocurrency is worth, buying and selling, right? The greatest fool theory or the greater fool theory. To me, that's not really anything of value, right? Like that's just a transactional record of the currency, and nothing is being done. Like no goods are being produced, no goods are being shipped or distributed, no services are being provided, right? It might be 5 or 10% of the actual transactional data that's stored on the blockchain that corresponds with that. But then if the vast majority of everything else is just speculation, I mean, you probably have another tulip scenario, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, at the end of the day, I'm always asking, what's the use case? What data are we actually storing on the blockchain? Is it transactional data associated with real world, economic activity, or is it just data associated with, internal speculation and things like that? And so, unfortunately, I agree with you. I think we're early as far as cryptocurrency, because I think cryptocurrency and specifically blockchain technology will continue to innovate and revolutionize the way everything is done, or most everything digitally is done into the future. And I'm talking hundreds of years into the future. But that being said, I think a lot of the money that's come in recently has been, for lack of a better word, dumb money, because there's no relationship between how much they're paying for each coin and what that actually translates into, or what it's derived from in terms of what gives it any kind of value, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're just investing in a meme coin, funny
Yeah, I mean,
picture or whatever, I mean, like,
like what
what kind of value does that really bring
you
to?
what does what's the value of Trump coin, right? Like you're buying it because it's like what you have some kind of visceral or like sympathetic, like connection to Trump. Like, is that why you're buying that coin? Well, what does that look like if he loses the presidency, right? Like, and doesn't win, right? uh what does it look like even if he does become president? Like, does that translate into him directing government funds into the Trump coin blockchain? Like, I mean, what does that even look like, right? Um, and so, yeah, to your point, I mean, what are you actually buying, right? Like at the end of the day, um, I've seen some use cases for blockchains that are they seem uh completely on point with what I think will be the future. And so things like I have where do I have? So like I have like a Modus Mini. Oh, that's like blocked out. I have like a Modus Mini, and again, these aren't sponsored or anything like that. But I have a Modus Mini miner. I have a Demo Macaron. These are miners that are connected to my car and allows me to essentially monetize my driving data, right? And so part of what drew me to crypto in the first place was, like you said in your intro, using pre-search. You're using a system that or a platform that actually rewards you for what the value is. The value is, think of social media. The value is the people that create the content. That's the real value. And so when, say, Facebook profits off of that and you get nothing or pennies, that's a ridiculous value proposition. Like, wait, I'm going to do all this time creating content and creating engagement, even if it's not to be an influencer. It's just like me talking with my aunt about, my cat, right? If I'm creating all this content and that's what's creating the conversation and drawing people in, why is it that the platform administrator, they should make something, but why is it that they're making the vast, 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 vast majority of the revenue and profit off of it? It doesn't make any sense, right? So some of the use cases I've seen for crypto that are absolutely amazing are things like, turning the data that you create every single day, like with pre-search, into crypto and being rewarded with that because you're essentially creating the value that's on that platform. I'm a huge Hive person. I love Hive because it is very much linked up to that. And so the value of the currency I can actually track associated with the number of people that are actually using the platform and not just kind of like posting cat memes, but actually disseminating information, creating a library of knowledge and sharing it. There's even now platforms popping up on Hive that are dedicated to, sales and service and things like that. And so I can see that outgrowth of that platform and say, okay, I have faith that the value of this crypto is going to be something into the future, at least, if not more than it is now, because I can see that growth trajectory and actual productive things happening, and that data is being stored on the blockchain, right? I've I've
Can you
also
tell me more about that project that you had up there? You said it was you could hook it up to your car.
yeah. So there's a couple of videos. So if you just look up Soar Chain Modus, and I think they actually changed the name of it. It used to be called the Modus Mini. I think it's called something else now. But if you just look up SoarChain, SOAR, this is a way of essentially monetizing your driving data. And you could do a couple of things with it. You can buy stuff in their store. So it's kind of like a closed system. But also at the same time, there are ways to convert that crypto, out and transfer it out into other things. And you can mine. So I have two miners that are connected to the car. So I had to buy a splitter. But both of these kind of go into essentially the data port in your car that your mechanic would connect to run like a diagnostic, right? The other thing of value that comes from that is the value of the crypto isn't just the data you're creating, it's also what then gets created using that data. And so, for instance, driving data specifically that come from vehicles only goes through one or two different data centers within the United States. And companies like, say, car insurance companies have to pay for that data to then generate insurance rates. Okay. This disintermediates that process. There's now not a central arbiter of who gets to use that data. And there's actually decentralized car insurance, maintenance warranty companies, and things like that that are popping up that then can use that data. And you get either discounted products and services as a result of being a participant in the project, or the value of your crypto, if you hold on to it when you get rewarded with it, goes up because there's now more economic activity that's happening that's associated with those services and products that are being built off of the platform. And so I can't guarantee that these projects are going to be successful over the long term, but what I can guarantee is there's actually some rational reason why the crypto that's generated by those projects should have value, right? Like there's actually things happening that create products and economic activity and utility and things like that, right? There's another one I have down here. I would have to like unwrap it. It's literally like a weather station. Um, and you put it on your roof, and there's a couple different variants of this one. This project uh, takes wind speed, temperature, humidity, dew point type readings, and barometric, and sends it back onto the blockchain to be recorded, and then that base of data can then be used by meteorological companies. There's a different version of it
Yeah.
that actually,
Decentralized weather. Wow.
yes, yeah, and even more
Fascinating.
accurate, like because it's much more efficient, right? Not to mention the fact that, like, what's the old adage, right? Like meteorologists are the only people that can be wrong like 90% of the time and still keep their job, right? I would actually make the argument politicians are probably higher than that, but um, uh, think of a more efficient way of weather data being disseminated to a bunch of different outlets, and they all use mathematical models, and most of the mathematical models are shit because there's all of these bottlenecks in the system for data, for thought, for sharing of things. If all of a sudden it became open source, and maybe you have to pay a fee to get access to it, but there's not some government bureaucrat that's requiring you to, bow down to them in order to get access to it, you're then democratizing more and more people because guaranteed there's some dude sitting in his basement who's a freaking genius who's going to take the data and just be like, oh yeah, it's going to rain in like 15 minutes and it's going to be this long and it's going to be, this much rain, this many inches of rain or whatever. And he'll be more accurate than, a lot of these other services that are out there. And
Yeah,
now
because
all of
you're
a
opening it up to a much larger, collective mindset. Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. You more
Yeah.
more minds equals,
Yeah.
more brain output. Yeah, absolutely.
And the same premise that these things are based off, these miners are based off of, is the
So
other
you
reason
you
why I like something like Hive because it does the same thing for news to be able
now
to suck
before
out
we get
propaganda.
too much into Hive, so sorry to
Sure.
interrupt you. On these miners, like the car miner, you're essentially giving them your data, right? And so
Yes.
you're getting coin for that, or like how like it is it running a node using your the power of your car, or how does that essentially work? Like how are you getting value by giving your data, and how would these coins exactly work?
Yeah. So most of it is app based through a smartphone. So quite often the miner connects through an application that's on your smartphone, and then there's a couple of different ways that happens. Either the smartphone is the node that collects the data from the miner and then transmits it to the blockchain, and that's how you get rewarded because you're also creating basically a warm wallet on your phone to accept that
Now,
reward.
I'm going to interrupt you again. Now,
Go ahead.
what data exactly are they collecting? Are they collecting like your personal driver data? Are they collecting data from, like, we want to know about,
Mm.
more about Chevy Blazers just in general, like how they operate, or like I'm guessing if it's for car insurance purposes, it's okay how this one single particular driver uh drives and like their habits and stuff. But
Yeah, so
yeah,
it's
go
it's
ahead.
it's de-identified and encrypted. So any of the data that gets shared is, and again, I mean, I've looked into the project. I have faith that that's true. Could that change one day? Sure. I mean, could the government build a backdoor in order to track you? Sure, right? There are ways around it in terms of, how your phone is set up, whether or not you're using just a standard iOS phone or you're using graphene or something that's built off of, a different platform. But that being said, it's supposedly and promised that it's de-identified and encrypted, and the data that they're pulling off of it isn't necessarily GPS data, right? So it's not tracking location. It's more so tracking. It's kind of like tracking your speed up, slow down tendencies. It's tracking wear and tear on the vehicle. It's tracking another perfect example of bottlenecking is the arbitrary fuel economy numbers that they put on vehicles and fleets of new vehicles, that all of that data goes through a centralized government database, and only certain manufacturers and other entities are given access to that data. This gives you real-time data. So, for instance, if my vehicle is brand new and it's sold as having 25 miles to the gallon, because the miner is tracking fuel economy on a real-time basis, it can give you a more accurate picture of what whether that fuel economy rating is actually correct, right? And it can also bake in a lot more, or at least the data that's generated can bake in a lot more variables. So, the location and the humidity and that kind of thing, you're not giving real-time GPS coordinates, but what you are doing is you're giving them some kind of sense of what region you're driving in, right? So they know weather differential and maybe even road condition differences and stuff like that. Someone could take that data set and then give you a better sense of it, because think of every Toyota Corolla that rolls off the line has the same sticker with the same fuel economy. Well, everyone knows in the automotive industry that that fuel economy is correct at the testing facility under certain conditions, right? And it's basically an average. Well, it's not true in the desert, right? Like, it's not the same in the Northeast when it's snowing out, right? Like, it's completely different in different places. So you could also get more realistic data as far as, and that's just one example. So it ends up creating better data. It ends up creating more accessible data. And, like you said, it opens up the number of just smart people that can get their hands on it and actually do something with it. And don't get me wrong, the thought crosses my mind quite often, like, am I being tracked by a Fed because I have this miner in my car? It's entirely possible.
Right. Yeah. Well, back to Hive. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Go,
that's
go
fine.
ahead.
It's in the same line as that. What these miners are doing for, say, like, auto insurance and car data and stuff, or weather data, the same thing is true of, say, like, free speech news data, right? Hive is literally a platform that is fully decentralized as far as the node structure, and that makes it virtually uncensorable. Okay. The beauty of it is, say you run a front end, and this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but I'll try and make this as understandable as possible. All of the data that the individuals using the blockchain and the apps that are based off of the blockchain gets stored in each one of the blocks of the blockchain as it gets built. Now, if you run any app to be able to pull data off of there, you can pick and choose as you want, right? And so if you run a front end, which is essentially your user interface to be able to interact with a lot of this data, if you run a front end and you don't want to show things like whatever, porn, or, sinister shit like pedo stuff and things like that, you can program your front end to not show those things. Okay. The beauty is that someone would be, well, I want to see those things, right? Like, I want a site that shows me, adult content. You're either free to create your own because the data is readily and easily accessible. You don't have to pay a fee or anything like that. Or find another provider that's willing to put those things up there. And so is there data that might never be like accessible wide scale, but ends up on the blockchain? Yeah, because it's probably some fucked up stuff that people, normal people don't want to engage in, right? And it's empowering because, again, the people that are creating the actual product, which is the conversation, it's the catalog of information that's being created by the blockchain, cataloging those posts and those videos and everything like that. Those people are being rewarded for doing the actual work that creates the value on that blockchain. One of my hangups with Bitcoin is Bitcoin strikes me as something that is completely detached in terms of its value from the people that would actually use it. And so the thought process of, I guess, Bitcoiners would be they want it to, like, if you're a Bitcoiner who wants Bitcoin to go to $1 million, like you're Michael Saylor, okay? What you're essentially saying is you want all of the cash in the world to siphon into Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin be so valuable that it's never used as a currency. It's almost like a self-defeating future that you're looking to create, right? Because the more expensive it becomes, the more cumbersome it is, and it has absolutely nothing to do its value with the commerce that's happening using it. The only thing, I mean, you're basically creating just a proxy for sucking in excess cash in the system, right? Like that's basically what you've created is a black hole for fiat, which doesn't solve a lot of the problems that people think Bitcoin should solve. And so what I like about Hive and some of these other projects, and this is typically, and I haven't written about this yet on Substack. And so anyone who wants to read some of my ramblings, you can go to anarchistinvestor.substack.com. And so I haven't written this out, but I really need to. I'll probably do it when I put together my portfolio of kind of like these, speculative microcap coins I do want to look at into the future, because I think when the crash happens, a number of these microcap coins will persist on because of that value proposition that they offer. But I have to put down my flow of logic, right? Like what I look at when I'm trying to evaluate a project or a coin and figure out whether or not it's overvalued, undervalued, what that future prospect of its value looks like. And so a
What
lot
are
of it
your
has to do
what
useful.
are your metrics for looking at coins?
A lot of it has to do, I start with use case. That's the first question I'm always going to ask, right? Like at the end of the day, what's the use case for this coin? Is it transactional? Is it something that's basically deriving its value from, say, there's projects that are using blockchain to essentially democratize health data, right? Like, is it based off of the number of records that are being used or being input into that system, right? And how good of the quality is it, right? That's always going to be my first question. Is at the end of the day, what's the use case? Then the next thing that I'm going to ask myself is, all right, if that's the use case, how good is it at actually uh, fulfilling that use case? Is it clunky? Is it cumbersome? Uh, and even if it's clunky or cumbersome, is there active development to fix those problems, right? A perfect example of, say, like a platform or a blockchain and an associated crypto that has kind of fallen on its face when it could have been amazing, and it still might be amazing in the future, but it's slowed down considerably, is Cardano. Cardano was something that could have been incredible because they were literally trying to create either a feeless or as low of a fee as possible, very liquid crypto that could be used transactionally. It succeeded to a certain extent, but then kind of development stalled for a long time. I think I've seen some reinvigoration into Cardano, but I'm always going to ask that question of whether or not the use case is either currently being fulfilled, and whether or not it's going to be fulfilled into the future, and whether or not it's going to get even better, right? Like, what does the development stack look like, or what does the enthusiasm look like for app developers on the platform? After that, the question then becomes, okay, if those two things are fulfilled, then what ultimately do I think is, market cap is probably a really bad word to use because, again, you got to remember that market cap is based off of the greater fool theory. It's what
Yeah.
the last transaction was, right? So market cap might be a bad idea, but I try and develop an overall idea of the value of that data or service or whatever that core kind of use case should look like,
Yeah, or
today and
just
then
just like how much exposure does this asset have,
yeah, like I mean, I wish there was a more effective
like
uh
metric for it.
yeah, like a utility metric or something, right? Like that, I wish there was a better metric, and that might be another development that happens into the future that makes crypto way more investable to the average person, right? It would be something along the lines of that, price to earnings multiple kind of jargon that they use on Wall Street, right? But yeah, it's developing an overall kind of idea of what the value should look like today, and then whether or not that has a growth trajectory into the future. And then you just do some basic math, right? Like whatever the overall value is, the total number of coins outstanding today, you know, what is each coin? What should each coin look like in terms of a price? And it gives you at least a general sense of what it is. So, like for instance, I did this kind of proof on the Substack for Bitcoin. And so what I came down to was Bitcoin has a value that's probably anywhere current, present day, in between 30,000 per coin, and it could be upwards of 100,000 per coin, right? And this was based off of assumptions, and I lay out all my assumptions as far as, what the transactional volume is in Bitcoin, how much of that is speculative on the price of Bitcoin versus actual business activity, and then what that represents in terms of the overall economic value, so to speak, and then divide by the total number of Bitcoin that are currently outstanding. And the number comes out to, in my mind, somewhere in between 30,000 and 100,000. I do think that Bitcoin will have some value into the future, but I think innovation in Bitcoin has slowed down. And so if it doesn't pick back up again, and if it doesn't you know find some kind of reinvigoration in terms of trying to innovate into the future, I could see Bitcoin retaining some amount of value, but I think that value is more going to be nostalgic, right? Like I think 100 years in the future, I think people will be like, I have a Satoshi era Bitcoin. You can't use it for anything, but it'll be like a piece of memorabilia, right? Like it'll be like a claim to fame, right? Essentially, a non like the first what was the analogy I came up with the other day? It was like the 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 first EFT, right? Like the first claim on the first prominent cryptocurrency that was out there. You would have one of those, right? Like one of those original um Bitcoin or any of the Bitcoin that are out there, and you could kind of show it off or something, right? Like I think they already have the display ones where it's like the cold storage wallet, but it'll actually show you, the code and scroll it for you on it, and you could stick it on your desk or whatever. I think there will be some value, but the people that are calling for Bitcoin to go like a million, I mean, this is a hallmark of mania, right? It's a hallmark of a bubble, and that's why I think that a lot of those crazier voices need to be dispelled from the space. And the way they're going to be dispelled from the space is when it falls precipitously, and a lot of the hucksters and a lot of the grifters lose, or they don't see value in grifting in that space anymore, and it becomes more realistic and it becomes more productive, and kind of moves into the future from that standpoint. I know it's a little bit of a doomer idea because a lot of people really want Bitcoin to be this amazing thing, but really at the end of the day, like I'm trying to remain as rational as possible about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think we're coming up on time here pretty soon. Is there anything you want to cover before we get going?
No, not specifically. I mean, I would love to come back and talk, like more current eventy type stuff because I think a lot ties into that. I mean, I've read some, if not all, but some of Dean's books, and I think the a lot of people that were purists, the moment that Roger Ver came out with hijacking Bitcoin, all of a sudden a lot of the people that read that and kind of bought into that then went back and they were like, oh, all of Dean's stuff is bullshit. But it really isn't. I mean, like there's still tons of really valid, correct stuff in his books. And so the one thing that I keep coming back to is that most of the I'll call it cultural rot, right? But I mean, that's not even a great term because the question then becomes, right, what culture, right? But that's just kind of the mainstream or the more kind of like liberty minded people are using that phrase. A lot of this kind of like cultural rot that's happening within the present day within the westernized world, you can actually tie back to fiat currency. You can tie back to inflation. right? Like you can tie back to the undermining of the value of currency in the financial system and basically the systematic theft of value that exists in that system. And so I would love to come back on in the future and just talk about some of the present day things because you name it, like whatever topic that you want to talk about. You want to talk about like, obesity in the United States and the Western world, right? That ties back to fiat currency inflation. You want to talk about, whatever, housing prices, actual inflation. You want to talk about, some of these religious phenomenon that are happening and have happened throughout time. A lot of them tie back to, I wouldn't necessarily call it economics. I would call it back to the co-opting of the economic system and kind of how people felt like they had to react or where they ran to. A lot of those different cultural trends, at least in part, relate back to the economics and the kind of like the investment aspect of things as a society. So I would love to talk from that standpoint. And what I would say is because the other channel that I run with my wife, we actually have an episode coming up here in a couple of hours, is called Ungovernable. We talk a lot about spirituality, metaphysics, and things like that. I know a lot of people have tried to tie that into Bitcoin, which I'm really worried about because then it starts to seem like a cult, right? But we talk a lot about metaphysics, spirituality, kind of the more gushy kind of stuff, right? Like the more ethereal, like woo woo stuff, right? I would love to talk about that too because we had Miranda Webb, to talk about her kind of like foray into that area, whether it be human design or how they use that at Anarchapulco. And we've had a couple of other people on that are more kind of like normie homesteader type people, but again, they're more kind of like religious Christian conservative background, and they still come at things from that standpoint. So that's also stuff I would be totally interested in talking about into the future, or people can pop over to Ungovernable and also look at that stuff too.
Yeah, man, I'd love to have you back on for sure. I think we've got a lot more interesting stuff to talk about, so I'll definitely be having you back on in the future. That was my next question, and I think you covered some of it. Is where can people find you?
Yeah, the easiest, I'll give you like three places. The first is my Substack, anarchistinvestor.substack.com. The second is you can follow me on X. So it's Matt _ Archy, Archy, on X. And then the last place would just be anywhere where you watch video content. We're on Rumble. I've had issues with Odyssey recently, but there's still some episodes up there, some older ones. We're trying to get back on, or YouTube or any of the other platforms. Just look up Ungovernable Pod, and we should come up as one of the top results there. Talk about a lot of stuff, like I said, spirituality, but we also talk about homeschooling and stuff like that. We're unschoolers, so yet another way that you can kind of short circuit the system and get away from it. Actually teach your kids truth as opposed to propaganda on a daily basis. So yeah, that's the biggest place. The one question I love to talk to people about, regardless of where I'm at, whether it's anarchists or libertarians or even kind of like, left, right type people, is just where you derive your belief system from, like your attachment to the, whatever you want to call it, the universe or, life, and how that informs what you consider your morals, your ethics, and things like that. Because I think the one really big pushback I get from most people about anarchy is, well, where do you get your moral and ethical, system of life from, right? Like, how do we not descend into complete chaos without, something like that? And so a lot of people defer to religion. I actually get to the same place as a lot of people that defer to religion, but I get there in a different route. And it's, what's funny is a lot of people refuse to believe that until I actually go through the proof. And so when you work the proof, you can look at a very logical process to get to the same point that a lot of people that are, say, Christian conservative, or even if they believe in Buddhism or something else, a lot of these roads lead to the same place. They just kind of take some different twists and turns before they get there. So love talking about that. But I want to say thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. I know I talk a lot, but it's when I get passionate about things, usually I run on a little bit.
No, yeah, as a host, I try to let my guests actually speak.
I
So
love it.
yeah. Yeah, man. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I'm gonna wrap it up with a quote here. Money is not an invention of the state. It is not the product of a legislative act. Carl Menger,
Mm,
Agorist Nexus out.
truth.
I'm plugged into the Agorist Nexus. We need the whole community connected. We're the alternative collective. Self-sufficient and effective. Pull the rug from